Welcome! Christine E. Schulze here, aka the Elvish author, aka author of young adult fantasy, as well as a few children's books that focus on special needs. And welcome to my YouTube channel. So what is this channel going to be about? Well, some of the things that we're going to be doing here is, first of all, with me being an author, I will be talking about my books. I fully welcome any questions that anyone may have about my books or who I am as a person or my process as an author. And also, I really want to be able to do some book giveaways. My first goal is to reach 100 subscribers here, and once that happens, I want to start having some book giveaways. A book giveaway to celebrate reaching 100 subscribers, but then in the future, also more book giveaways where I host a contest by video, you guys comment to place your entry, and then someone wins personalized autographed copy of one of my books. I want this channel to definitely be interactive and welcoming to everyone. Some other things will be showing you book trailers of my upcoming books, talking about book signings, doing a lot of book readings. I have a section that has to do with book readings called Chapter Reactions, which more on that in a little bit. I'll tell you more about that. Yeah, but first I'm just gonna dive in and tell you guys a little bit about myself, because if you don't even like who I'm about as an author, why should you waste your time with my page, right? So yeah, like I said, I am an author of young adult fantasy, as well as several children's books that have to do with special needs characters, which are inspired by my day job. I also have a day job where I work with adults who have autism and other disabilities. It's an awesome, fantastic, super fun job where I'm constantly surrounded by super awesome, fantastic, fun people. And so yeah, so that's a little bit about me and what I do. I've been writing since, people ask me, when did you start writing? Well, technically when I was like 4 years old, and I wasn't writing yet, but I was making books just from pictures or collages of like magazines and things like that. So yes, writing's just always been something that's in me. One thing that's important to me as a writer is to try to include more diverse characters, and that's been important to me ever since I was a young child. Even, being a young child, I kind of noticed, like, hey, there's now a lot of diversity in fantasy, my favorite genre, and so since I didn't see a ton of that, I just started writing books myself that included more diversity. So a lot of my characters will be, made up races, and a lot of those races have a very diverse look to them, because I feel like, everyone wants to see themselves represented in their favorite genre. And if your favorite genre is fantasy, you should get to see yourself, someone who looks like you. And also, in my young adult fantasy, I've started to include a couple of characters who have disabilities, because I feel like they're also underrepresented, and hey, they should get to go on adventures the same as anybody else. So that's kind of my passion. My passion has always been to include more racial diversity in fantasy, and now, having spent 8 years working with folks who have disabilities, starting to include, a few more characters like that as well. So I guess you probably also want to know a little bit about some of the books I've written. I have quite a lot out at this time, but some of the lovely gems that you can find online, be that at Amazon or on Barnes & Noble's website, some other websites if you're just, wanting an ebook, include Prelude of Fire, the Strigoni Sequence, Chronicles of the Mirror, The Crystal Rings, Larmar, Gem of the Sea, One Starry Night, Beyond the Veil. And for children's books, some of my children's books include In the Land of Giants, The Amazing Captain K, and The Puzzle of the Two-Headed Dragon. Now, I actually do have a few more books, but those are the ones that I have on hand right now. So let's just talk for a second about series, because a lot of these books are divided into series. For kids, you have the Special Needs Heroes, which is a collection of 4 books that can be read in any order. Again, all of the characters, main characters in those books have special needs or are inspired by someone with special needs that I've worked with. And then for young adult fantasy, which is my main genre, we have the Amelian Legends. Now, the Amelian Legends is also a collection of standalone books that can be read in any order. However, they do all take place in the same fantastic universe. So as you read more books in the series, you might start to notice, hey, I recognize that character from the other book. Or, hey, I remember that kingdom, we were there in the other book. So there are some connections and some crossovers the more that you read. But again, with the Amelian Legends, you can literally read those in any order. And then I have the Strigoni Sequence, which we did see. This is my all-in-one compilation, although it's also available in 3 separate books, as you can see there. Those are the 3 separate covers, the original covers. And the Strigoni Sequence is my one series that I like to classify as Christian fantasy, because even though a lot of my other books, have themes of friendship or forgiveness or good versus evil or acceptance and equality, and all those just really good, values just kind of naturally woven in. And even though a lot of the characters have faith in a god called Amiel, and sometimes they will talk about that just as a natural part of their lives, with the Strigoni Sequence, there are characters who are actually, the main characters are actually Christian, and they do talk about God, again, just as a natural part of their life. They do talk about God, and they do pray. And so I do like to let people know that the Strigoni Sequence I consider Christian fantasy, because if that's not so much your thing and that's going to make you uncomfortable, then maybe it's just not the best series for you. But the Strigoni Sequence is a 3-book collection. Well, they call that a trilogy, don't they? A trilogy in which... so I wanted to take vampires and fairies and elves and genies and just these different, mythological creatures and peoples that I had never written about before and just kind of put my own spin and my own twist on them. And also in each book, there's at least one person who's under a spell that needs to be broken. So it's kind of a darker, fairy tale-esque type of trilogy. Now, my newest series is the Galian Quartet, which Prelude of Fire is the first book in the Galian Quartet. And this is going to be a 4-book series, and it's called Prelude of Fire and the Galian Quartet because in the, as you can see here, you've got the fire forming a treble clef shape. And the series is basically going to contain a lot of musical magic. It doesn't contain quite as much in the first book. You kind of get a feel for it, but definitely book 2, which should be out later this year. And moving forward, there's a lot of musical magic where a lot of the magic is based upon someone singing to cast a spell or someone playing a musical instrument to cast a spell. And it's also one of those series that's really about how the different choices we make define the type of person we will become. I kind of compare it a little bit to The Legend of Zelda, which you can see I'm a big fan of, combined with, a little bit of Harry Potter, combined with a little bit of Game of Thrones, but for young adults. So book 2 kind of has a little bit more of a palace intrigue, a little bit of political intrigue going on to it. So a little bit of that Game of Thrones vibe, but again for young adults. And then if you like, things like Lord of the Rings, you're probably gonna like the first book for sure because the characters go on a quest. Or again, if you're into Zelda, I think this is a really good series for you. So yeah, so those are the series that I have going on right now. So I mentioned earlier that one section I'm going to be doing here on my channel is called Chapter Reactions, and I want to take a second to talk about what that's going to be like, because that's going to be a big thing that I'm doing here. So Chapter Reactions, formerly known as a chapter a day, when I first started the channel, was just kind of fussing and kind of seeing, getting my feet wet. Basically, what I'm going to be doing is that in each video, I will read a blurb and a couple of chapters from a book to you. And it's usually going to be a book that I've never read before, unless it's a favorite one of mine that I really want to share, or unless it's a book that I've written, of course. And what that's to do is to just kind of introduce you, as well as myself, to some new books and help us both discover some things that we might really enjoy reading. Yeah, and I'm going to be doing quite a few of those. Some of them are going to be by myself, some will be with my boyfriend, Isaac. And we're just going to be reading books. It's going to be kind of like a reaction video, because we're going to read the chapters and then decide afterward, hey, did we enjoy that? Did we not? What are some questions we have? Are we intrigued? Is this something we would move on to read? And I really want this to be an interactive channel, so I fully welcome any comments, any questions that you have for me about myself and my writing, but also any comments and questions over any of the books that I introduce to you. So one thing that I do want to say real quick before we move on to the next thing that I want to do here is I do want to apologize in advance. Some of the next few videos will not be as clear and bright as this one. I'm really just getting started, and so I've already recorded some videos that I want to share with you guys of me reading from certain books, but that was before I realized that I could get this nice fancy light in my budget. And so they will be a little bit darker and not, they won't look quite as nice as this one. And I do apologize about that in advance. just bear with me as I'm learning. Thankfully, I'm mostly reading to you, so you guys don't have to see my face quite as nicely as maybe in a different kind of video, but I do still want to make things look as nice for you guys as possible. So moving forward, I will be recording with my light, but just bear with me those first few videos if they are a little bit darker and not quite as clear looking. So what I'd like to do next is to give you guys a taste of a chapter reaction. I thought that a good book to start with for that would be Beyond the Veil. Now, Beyond the Veil is similar to, I gotta find it here, I have all my books in a pile now. Beyond the Veil is similar to Larimar Gem of the Sea in that it's really more of a longer short story, or you could call it a short novella. As you can see, it's not very big. This one's only about, 70, it's about 80 pages, and Larimar's about 60. So these are both available as free ebook downloads on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and some other websites. The reason I do these free short stories is because I feel like it gives new readers a nice sample of my work. They can check out a short story, and if they like it, they can maybe move on to read more. In fact, Larimar, it stands as the first book in the Amelian Legends, because again, it's a nice sample of my work, and it does take place in the same universe as the other more full-length books, and so it just works as a nice starter to that collection. Beyond the Veil, though, we're going to read this because, you know, well, again, it'll give you a good sample of my work. Beyond the Veil is definitely young adult fantasy. It does have more romance element as well, and an adventure element, and it is actually, as you can see here, it is the prequel to the Galleon Quartet. Now, it's not necessary to read this before reading the Galleon Quartet, but if you're one of those people like me that likes to know anything and everything about a series and a world and all the details, you might be interested in reading this first. I will say that even though there is a character mentioned in here that does come into play in the first book in the Galleon Quartet, the main characters that are mentioned in here, you won't really learn more about all that so much until book 3. But if you read the series, you'll still understand why this is a prequel and, you know, where certain characters come from that are in other books. So yeah, we're just going to hop in and we're just going to read from Beyond the Veil, the prequel to Prelude of Fire. Okay, so I always start with the blurb, unless I think the blurb gives away too much and I want to keep things kind of suspenseful, but we're going to start with the blurb. And the blurb to Beyond the Veil says, trapped inside an unwanted betrothal, Jillian of Adelar seeks escape within a forbidden magical veil. Beyond, she meets Callum, a knight's son from Rosa, with whom she instantly connects through their shared passion against age-old prejudices. But for any Adelaran, and especially Jillian, bonding with someone from another race is forbidden. Loving them would be downright criminal, an act worse than murder. As Jillian's friendship with Callum blossoms into something deeper, she faces a difficult choice. Will she walk away from Callum forever? Or will she risk everything to flee with him and find the freedom she's always yearned for? So one thing that's included in the Amelian Legends books, as well as the Galleon Quartet, because again, they do kind of take place, well, largely in the same realm, is a map of the 4 realms. So I do also have other worlds besides this one, but as you, well, maybe you can't tell, but the larger land shape over here is shaped more like North America, and that's because when I was younger, I developed this mythology that there were all these magical kingdoms in North America and on the islands off the western coast, and that, you know, as time went on and as the Europeans, quote, discovered the Americas, a lot of these magical peoples had to go into hiding. I have this whole backstory and history. So this particular story takes place within that realm, which is known as the Lazolian realm. And so yeah, so it kind of pretend like this is a, you know, a magical mythological history for North America in a sense. There's also the realm of the 7 kingdoms, which is on, you know, the North American mainland. The Lazolian realm is in the islands that I made up that are off the coast of North America. And then the peoples of these realms refer to the Eastern realm, which is even further east into North America. They don't really explore that area too much. And then the Western realm, they consider if you sail all the way to like Australia, Asia, and there are people from the Zolian realm who sometimes go and explore those regions. But those, the Western and Eastern realm, considered more mysterious. So I just wanted to share that with you. So this particular book starts out with a little letter, and then it goes into diary entries. So we're just going to read a little bit of Beyond the Veil to give you guys a taste. My dearest Galia, this booklet, forged from journal entries and letters, is the account of my life over the past year and a half. I am Jillian, the Lady of Adalar, whose life before the time I wrote this seemed so very small, insignificant, and hopeless. I write this account because the time may come when I have to sacrifice my life, and thus ours, for the fight for freedom your father and I have striven to lead over the past couple of years. I pray that as you read it, my sweet daughter, you shall find hope and understanding. Your father and I would never have given you up willingly. You are our heart, and we love you with all of ours. And again, Galia will be a character that you, obviously that you meet, because the series is called the Galian Quartet. But we now know that that is a little note from her parents, and that this is going to be part of their story. So, strap on your elf ears and get ready to listen to Beyond the Veil. Diary Entry 1. So many times I'd stood before the door to the forbidden room, debating whether or not I should enter, and so many times I had given in. But today was different. Today was the day I felt that if I went through that door, I might never want to come out ever again. I had fought with my father, King Weston of Adalar, for the last time. I would not marry Danyan. Danyan may have been father's chief councilman, and like the son he'd never had, but he was not for me. I could not marry such a bitter, unfeeling soul. And yet, where could I go? How could I resist the bidding of a man who was not only my father, but the king as well? King over both my kingdom, the only home I had ever known, and my very life. There was only the door and the room. They had been my only means of escape from the suffocating walls of the castle for many years, and they seemed my only, if temporary, escape now. I slipped inside and noiselessly shut the door behind me. The cavernous room's ceiling was supported by elegantly carved pillars. As ever, I admired their craftsmanship in passing. I passed statues, maps on the walls, and soon came to my favorite section, the Library of Forbidden Books. I glided past shelf upon shelf of books speaking of the lands beyond the borders of Adalar, places like Laz, Hyloria, and other of Zephyr's islands. I had often wondered why the books, and the worlds they spoke of, should be so forbidden. Was it such an unforgivable crime to desire to step beyond my insular, narrow-minded kingdom, to be free to make my own choices for once? What was the worst that could happen to me? That the engagement might be broken off? Very well, so I would be alone. I'd always believed that I would be anyway, for I was certain that to marry Danyan would make me feel even more alone than ever. Finally, emerging beyond the bookshelves, I stopped and looked. There it stood, my way to freedom, the veil. In the midst of the room stood a golden archway, on which hung a white silky curtain stretching to the floor. I knew what it was, for I had read about them in one of the books of the Forbidden Room. It was one of the veils the magicians of old had scattered across the 8 spectral miles, to be used when the need arose to escape enemies or swiftly deliver important messages. It was unknown how many such veils had survived after the Mad King had them burned, along with many of the sorcerers who had created them. I sometimes wondered if this was the last one standing. The veil beckoned me forward. Though there were no windows in the room, it swayed gently, as if a breeze blew from within. I reached out and clutched its silky softness in one hand. Then I slipped inside, into the dark. Though surrounded by complete blackness, I did not feel afraid. Rather, I felt excited, drawn forward by the thrilling unknown and not entirely of my own will. The veil seemed to have a will of its own, for I somehow knew that I could not turn back now that I had started. But this lack of control did not scare me. I was glad for the veil's guidance, as long as it took me away from the home that had become such a prison. I crept carefully forward, hand outstretched. My fingertips brushed against something soft. Hand trembling, I drew aside a second veil and stepped outside. Hazy sunlight washed over me. The thick branches overhead filtered the sunlight, creating thin but pleasantly warm, glowing streamers of light. I barely had time to take anything else in because the next moment someone shouted, "Watch out!" I plunged to the ground, Throwing my arms over my head as something massive swooped from the sky. A great rush of wind chilled me as the huge something soared scarcely a yard above me. And then, the next moment, everything fell silent. Slowly, I looked up and stared in amazement. Standing only a few feet away was a giant eagle. His feathers shone a deep golden brown, except for his head, which was snowy white. Most mesmerizing of all was the almost blinding glint of his eyes. One glowed bright blue, the other deep red. Both sparkled with hundreds of tiny facets, as though his eyes were actually embedded with a sapphire and ruby. They reflected a sense of power, and the eagle himself stood with his strong shoulders thrown back, head lifted high. As I rose to my feet, I noticed a young man on the eagle's back, still hunched down and clutching the eagle's feathers for dear life. Whether his grip was due to the ride itself, the landing, or both, he seemed either too frightened or else too shocked to realize they had stopped. So I called quietly, "Are you all right?" He looked up. His brows rose as his glance caught me. "Oh yes, thank you, just a moment." He slid off the eagle's back and proceeded to brush off his breeches. They didn't look dirty, but he kept moving his hands in swift, erratic patterns until he seemed quite sure of this himself. He looked up then, his auburn curls contrasting with my long blonde waves, his vivid blue-green eyes studying me closely. His features made me wonder if he might be a scintillate, from roses specifically. He took deep breaths, as if trying to calm still trembling nerves, and his hand twitched, as if in a desire to keep brushing his flawless pants. Still watching me, he smiled and said, "I am sorry if I frightened you." It's all right," I assured, though I felt a bit uncomfortable being stared at with such interest. "Are you sure you're all right?" "Yes, quite. What are you?" he blurted. I'm Adelarin, and," I added with a playful smirk, "my name is Jillian, if you'd like to know." "Forgive me," he mumbled, his face turning a shade of red that nearly matched that of his wild curls. "That's what I meant. I'm not usually such an incoherent fool, only the ride befogged me. Jillian is a lovely name. Mine is Callum, but the Adelarins—" "Forgive me," he repeated. "I'm terribly curious about races outside my own. Aren't they the people who are each born with a different magical power?" I nodded. "Yes, unlike some peoples, who are known for a certain signature magic, an Adelarin may be born with any power, though powers of the mind are most common." "May I ask what your power is?" "Certainly." His nerves made him seem more human and put my own at ease, and I was suddenly glad to speak to someone who found me interesting for once, or for that matter, someone who spoke to me at all rather than ordering me around. "My power has to do with my music. I can hypnotize people with my music, make them do things." His eyes widened. "Truly? Can you show me?" I was surprised to be so quickly trusted by a stranger. "Are you certain?" "Why, yes. You'll do me no harm, I take it." He smiled. Mischief lit his eyes as he gestured toward the massive eagle behind him. "And I dare say the Eagle of Spectrum will defend me if you do." I smiled back. "I promise no harm will befall you." Then, after some quick thought, I began to whistle. Slowly, Callum stepped forward. His eyes glazed over, and he looked truly mesmerized. My whistling trailed as he stopped right before me, so close that I only now realized how tall he really was. As I studied his eyes, I saw that they shone with an even more vivid interest and watchfulness. "You know," he said quietly, "you didn't have to do that." "Do what?" I said, my voice hushed to match his. "Use your powers for that purpose. Your charm and talent are enough to have beckoned me." For a few moments, we stood in silence, simply gazing into each other's eyes. My heart raced. I had never seen such a look in anyone's eyes, nor had I ever felt this way about anyone. I wasn't sure what it meant, and it both frightened and exhilarated me all at once. I knew it couldn't be love. I'd never believed in love at first sight. But infatuation, perhaps, and maybe even friendship. Perhaps it was simply because he seemed to share my curiosity and boldness, or perhaps it was something more that I couldn't yet define. Finally, I glanced away to take in my surroundings. We stood in a glen, in the midst of a dense forest. The trees were tall and the branches broad, providing a canopy that allowed only thin streams of sunlight to enter, yet the clearing was very bright. The trees, as well as the surrounding bushes, were covered in white blossoms, the petals of which had not yet opened. "What is this place?" I breathed. "I don't know. I've never been here before. Have you?" "No." Again, silence passed between us. There was a moment when I glanced up only to look quickly away from his deep, powerful gaze. His eyes held an enchanting quality all their own, no magic needed. At last he spoke. "So, how did you come to be here?" I told him all about the veil and the forbidden room, omitting anything about my father, Danyan, or any of my troubles. I ended by explaining my need to be free of my people's narrow-minded ways. "Yes, Callum nodded. I can understand that. My people are every bit as prejudiced as yours. My eyes widened. But by your looks, you seem to be a scintillate, are you not? I had not heard that they could be so bigoted. I've read in books about laws that scintillates are explorers, filled with curiosity about the world around them. I am a scintillate, half anyway, but not from laws. I am from Rosa, and I fear my land has been instilled by prejudice for many long years. Was I not a son of a renowned knight, I would have surely been exiled by now for my mixed blood. Not that exile would be such an awful fate. Then you understand, I said, in awe of the fact anyone could feel as I did. You understand my loneliness, my longing for freedom, he said quietly. Our eyes met again. This time, his watchfulness did not make me so uncomfortable. Rather, I watched him just as closely. We held this gaze for a long time, wondering and searching for our new but already strong understanding. I could still hardly believe that, so quickly, I had formed such a bond with a stranger, someone who shared my own dreams for freedom. Why can't you just use your powers, he asked quietly, to escape? I glanced away. Moments ago, we had been sharing our hearts. We'd been one in our quest for freedom. I wasn't so willing to let that moment end, so I chose a quick, curt reply. Those who cage me have powers of their own, or else have the power to block mine. Father had never been swayed by my song, and Danyan was too keen at finding hidden truths. I looked up. Callum accepted my answer with a quiet nod and said no more on the subject. After a time, we sat beneath one of the trees and talked. For what seemed like hours, we spoke of music, of books. We found that we both liked to write stories and compose songs, and Callum said we should trade them sometime. That is, he said with a hopeful glance, if you'd like to meet again. Oh, yes, I said, blushing at my own eagerness. But he only smiled, and I smiled back. I felt, for the first time in ages, that I could be myself around someone. I could talk freely, smile, even laugh without anyone taking offense. And with his friendly, playful talk, he kept me laughing. In the midst of our conversation, the eagle nuzzled its head between us. I jumped in surprise, but then he caressed my face with his soft feathers, as if apologizing. He seems to like you, Callum said. Where did he come from, I asked. From Rosa, of course, just like me. Where else would he have come from, silly? Callum smiled playfully, and I lifted my chin in mock hauteur. You speak too boldly with the daughter of a king. I beg your pardon, milady. He seemed genuinely abashed. I admit I feel very comfortable in your presence, and perhaps I have let myself be too free with my words. I promise I'll be more courteous. No, please don't. I automatically reached out to grasp his hand, almost shocked by the touch of his warm skin before shyly letting go. I was but teasing you. I like the way you talk to me. His smile returned, and it was warmer, not as playful, but far more meaningful. I am glad, he said softly. The moment threatened to turn into another heavy silence, and I hastened to break the spell lest things go too far between us. Then tell me more about the eagle, I blurted, and how you came here to this place. Very well, Callum said, though his eyes twinkled as if he knew why I had spoken so quickly. Zephyrian eagles are very rare, but a couple of them are born every now and then in Rosa, and the strongest is an appointed guardian of our kingdom. Originally, they were meant just to protect us, but now they are one of very few ways to breach the 4 barriers that surround Rosa, 2 massive walls of water and 2 of fire. Breaching those barriers without the eagles involves advanced, complex magic, difficult for even the sharpest mind to understand. So, I stole into the treasury, obtained the eagle's song. The song is a summons, a spell of sorts that is required by any who wishes to command him, else he'll follow no one's will but his own. The song doesn't require a musical mage. Anyone of rose and blood can play and use it. I played the song, the eagle brought me here, and here I am. The eagle's song, I reflected aloud, completely engrossed in his tale. Shall I hum it for you? I nodded. He hummed it a few times. He had a rich, deep voice, and I deposited it carefully to my memory. Do you like it? He asked. Very much so. Good, though I admit it does sound a good deal better when played on my lute. My eyes lit up. A lute? That's one of my favorite instruments. Perhaps you could bring it to play next time. Callum's smile turned wry, and he glanced away. My heart fell a little despite myself. Stranger though he may be, I would already call him more of a friend and kindred spirit than anyone who lived at the castle with me. When Callum looked at me again, the hard edge on his gaze had softened. I would truly like to see you again. I'm just not certain how possible that might be. You see, I'm actually helping to head a rebellion in Rosa, to help end the prejudices I spoke of. Tensions are rising, and there have been some frightening acts committed in the name of demanding unity throughout the land. People are put to death for treason for the smallest slights, or in many cases, on the mere whims of the king, just because they are not of pure scintillate blood. I have been using the eagle to travel and rally followers, to make plans for our rebellion. However, doing so is risky. Each time I escape, I risk capture and imprisonment. I know that the king's spies are suspicious of a rebellion, though whether or not they are suspicious of me remains yet to be seen. He sighed and shook his head. I suppose I just don't want to make any promises, but if I can, I will come to you again. Tomorrow, I have journeys to make for the rebellion. I will try to meet you here at sunset. Our time and the time here, wherever we are, seem to be one and the same. I nodded slowly. Is there anything I can do to help with the rebellion? Callum's brows rose. He looked not so much surprised, but amused. You and I truly are alike. I would seize opportunity to aid a stranger like myself, if for the cause of justice and freedom so long ago abandoned by our peoples. But how do you know I'm not really some enemy spy? I gazed at him seriously. Perhaps I am in a circumstance where I do not have so many choices, or time to choose, when it comes to whom I trust. Perhaps I just have to trust my intuition and believe that whatever you are doing is the possible path of freedom I've sought. Callum didn't say a word, nor did he need to. The expression on his face reflected my thoughts. Time was running out for the both of us. Indecision truly was not an option. Glancing at the darkening sky, I said, I should get going before I am found missing. Then I shall escort you back to the Vale. As he held me to my feet, I looked up and gasped, The Vale! It's gone! He grinned. No, it's not. See those two trees, so perfectly straight and parallel to each other? I nodded. Through there lies your Vale. Some of the Vales were made like that, so that one entrance was disguised. Don't worry, you'll get back. I was more worried about not ever getting back here, but I kept this thought to myself. Until tomorrow, then, perhaps. Yes, he said, if Amiel grants it. He gently kissed my hand. Good night, Lady Gillian. Good night. He threw himself on the back of the eagle, and they disappeared into the night sky. As they mounted higher and higher, the eagle's eyes shimmered and then vanished into the ocean of stars. I watched the sky a few moments more and then walked between the trees, through the darkness, and out of the Vale into the forbidden room. I wandered half-dazed back to my bedchamber, ready for bed, and snuggled beneath the covers. Before allowing myself to fall asleep, I prayed. First, I thanked Amiel for blessing me with the friend I had so desperately needed. Then, I prayed that he had not really just been a dream, after all. And that is the end of our reading from Beyond the Veil and a glimpse into what will be going on with chapter reactions. If this was a book I hadn't read, I would, say how I liked it, certain things that I'm liking about it so far, if I'm interested in still reading it, some questions that I have, and then I would ask you guys, as I'm going to ask you guys with this, how did you enjoy this reading? What do you think of this intro video so far? Is Beyond the Veil a story that you'd be interested to read more of? Do you have questions about it? If you have read it, what are your thoughts on it? But please try not to have spoilers, or at least have a warning about spoilers for those who haven't read it. Now, if you're interested in reading the rest of Beyond the Veil for yourself, as I said, it's available as a free ebook download on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Smashwords, some other websites. It is also available as a, pretty inexpensive paperback since it's not that big of a book. I like to make, even things like this into a paperback because even though it's quite short, some people prefer the feel of a paperback in their hands or a book in their hands as opposed to an ebook. I myself happen to be one of those people, so I try to do that with, even my very, very short works such as this. So you can also find the paperback on Amazon as well if that's your preference. And of course, you can find all of my books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and some other websites when it comes to ebooks. And yeah, also leave some comments down below on anything that you might be interested in seeing on my channel, whether that's a book that you might want me to do chapter reaction on and read, whether it's a book you've read and you want others to discover, or whether it's a book you've never read for yourself. I will say that I don't have access to a library right now, unfortunately, where I live. However, my boyfriend may be able to get certain books from his library. That is a possibility. Are there certain types of videos that you want me to do on here beside the chapter reactions and doing book giveaways and showing you book trailers that I may have for my books? Are there questions that you want to ask me that I could answer in a future video? Anything that you're interested in, please drop it in the comments below. Like this video or don't like this video, and be sure to subscribe and share with all of your book-loving friends, especially if they love young adult fantasy. We will be reading from a lot of young adult fantasy, but I also will be reading from young adult thrillers and some other types of books as well. But remember, once we reach 100 subscribers, we're going to do our first book giveaway, and we'll do some others moving forward from there. But we have to reach that first 100 subscribers first. So yeah, I think that I've said everything that I need to introduce myself and my books. On that note, happy reading, may you be inspired, and I will see you hopefully in my next book and in my next video.